start. I'm about to start. Hello. Hello everyone, welcome to the stream. Headphones in. Yes, got sound. Microphone. Could be closer. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? I think we're ready. Let's just head straight to the game. Been a lot of changes since last stream. Look at my little roll call I have here. People popping in, asking who I have. Now they can just see. I did have something else to say. I like this little waiting screen here. Look at this. Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn are married. They had a child. I sent it away. It was weird. It was a weird child. I put the sound down on the game. How's this? As always, how are the levels? This is the thing I'm the worst at. Can you hear me? From what I can see. Alright. I gotta wait till someone pops in before. Oh, something's happening with John's The Martian Manhunter. So last stream, I created Batgirl. And let's see. Waiting for this to scroll. What other news? I'm struggling with the look at Metamorpho dance. I've edited my Hall of Justice, and you can't put readable words in that on buildings. It's very annoying. Keeps popping in with these guys. John, the Martian Manhunter, and the Flash, they've moved in together. Not with the other superheroes, so we're trying to get a team. Look, I've created Bane. So here we go. Batgirl was the last one. I've created Flash since then. Mr. Terrific, it was very fun to do that, Jack. And Professor Zoom, you just grab Flash and you change his colours around. It's very easy. And Bane was the last guy. Last stream I said try not to be too Batman heavy, but I have Arkham Asylum, and there's only like 3 people in there, so yeah, maybe we add another Batman villain today. Poison Ivy loving this dance. I like, if I make a Hal Jordan Green Lantern, then I will have all the founding members of the Justice League. Make another Batman villain, try and fill Arkham Asylum. There was a lot of Two-Face talk last stream, so maybe we try that. Batgirl, look at that. Okay. So I have already, so there's my new Hall of Justice. That's the Super Friends, and then here we have the Justice League, 2 members so far. Let's see. Let's get right in there. She's gonna want to build something. I know that.
Do you have a moment?
Yes, I have a moment.
I would just love it if there were a sprinkler right here.
That's not bad. A sprinkler at the beach. Good idea. Or is that the worst
That's so
idea?
satisfying. Thank you. I love living on Supertown.
In the background there, I've redone my Arkham Asylum. It looks a bit better. I'd like it to be more kind of gothic-ish. I don't like the sprinklers and showers. Make them get out of their clothes. She's so loud.
Ahoy, hoy, other husband.
This is my wife.
Who in the Gatsby fan club best represents a jokester? Let's ask my
That's a good
roommates.
question, actually.
I'll round everyone up.
If it's quantity, it's me. quality
On
there.
3, say the first name that comes to mind when you think of a jokester in the Gatsby fan club. 1, 2, 3. Tiny.
Yeah.
Comic Space.
Yeah.
Me.
Yeah. It's Comic Space.
Husband Face.
That's what he calls Comic Space.
We discussed who
So
in
not
the
really sure
Gatsby
on my plan
fan
today.
club
I'd
best
like to-
represents a
There's
jokester. It's
I'd
Comic
like to do
Space.
some island tidying.
That's a lot to live up to, but I'll do my best. You heard?
I'm glad I got everyone's opinions.
I'd like to create a Bizarro Superman. I need more villains. Alex has so many things I'd like to give her clothes. Let's bury her. No. A nice dress. These are not dresses she would wear. That Viking outfit was pretty good. There's the fancy light one. That's quite expensive. And we are getting it for free. How about that? I think she'd love to have the axe. Yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
Double. Selling salad. Clever. Stand
So what
close.
else is going on?
You
Lex
can go
Luthor's
on.
got pink going on. Do you in love?
You know
Who could
who
he
I
be in
am.
love with?
It may just be my imagination, but I get the feeling that Wonder Woman has a crush on me.
You sure about that?
Wait, are you saying it's all in my head? It's weird,
need to
but
get
lately
him
I
hanging
can't
out with
stop thinking about the
villains a bit
lovely
more.
scent of a zine.
Smelly zines. Smelly zines. Have a donut.
Only the best for me.
I've gotten to the point where there's not a lot I can give them. I can't think of any more expressions. What does Lex Luthor say? Any kind of suit. Have I gotten more suits since I last spoke to him? Nah, he's got all the suits. He's got both colours of those. I kind of miss the Animal Crossing thing of you ask for stuff, you ask your friends, hey, do you have this? And then they send it to you. He doesn't have these. Oh, he's got black ones, he doesn't have grey ones. Oh. Is that what you're wearing? The stripe matches.
Thanks
the
for
waistcoat.
everything you do. This is a little gift from me.
That all works out. Superboy's got problems.
Huh. Hello. My room could use a new vibe.
Yeah, I agree. I like the kid stuff. The brick wall, though. I did create a Fortress of Solitude type.
Welcome.
That's the best I can do.
Thank you very much.
Can
Please
I
come again.
preview that? Yeah. So the Superman house is pretty.
Yeah, this is
it's
different.
kicking along. I think Supergirl's
Thank you.
there now. We got Superman, Lois, Superboy, Supergirl, and Lex is there as well. Again, I think I'm running out of things to give him.
I speak with.
Do I have more jeans? He's got one of those costumes where you can give him casual clothes. So he's got these light blue ones, I've got this dark blue. Right now he's got small ones. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you celebrate other people's successes, Mr.?
It depends on the person, of
Oh,
course.
really? I wonder if you'd be proud of my accomplishments.
Superboy. Superboy, I'm very proud of your accomplishments. Have some ham and asparagus.
Yum.
So much of this food looks really good. I'd like to eat some of it. The ham and asparagus, the sauce looks good. Looks like a bit of hollandaise or something. John John's. So if I get him or Flash to move in,
Good seeing you.
there's the two superhero groups. If any of them want to move in with any of the others, then they're all combined.
I've got some unstructured time right now.
That's the
I
goal.
wouldn't mind listening to some music.
Music. What music does he like? I reckon he would like jazz or classical. He's a 50s man. Did he like it though?
Do you celebrate other
Hey.
people's successes, Mr.?
That's new.
Oh, really? I wonder if you'd be proud of my accomplishments.
I've never had the same thing twice in a row like that before. Let's watch him listen to the music. Sure. So here's my Bane. The trick here is you can't get blank red eyes. You can do blank white eyes, pupilless. So what I've done is no eyes. Those are his eyebrows. Doesn't mean he won't blink, but he does still do expressions.
I want to be friends with Professor Zoom.
Yeah, has that voice.
What should we talk about?
I think that's good. Crimes. What are these two? They're both villains. Not fighting crimes. Do I have to do a new one? Ruling the world? I don't know if Bane wants to rule the world. Definitely had bad guy things. I had doing crimes. Doing crimes. Here we go.
Got it. I'll go talk to him about doing crimes.
Looking very dark.
Hey, Professor Zoom. Do you feel like talking about?
So I gave Flash and Professor Zoom jogging
Doing
DVDs, and it's cool because they run
Sure.
around, but sometimes they wear jogging
Well,
outfits.
I have
Never
to
gave-
say, I've been super into doing crimes lately.
Wish you could at
Really?
least design the
Me too.
jogging outfit.
Yeah, I've totally come around on the choice of doing crimes. We should hang out sometime and do that.
So want all the villains to be friends. I want all the good guys to be friends. Poison Ivy, he's in the background, wants to play a game. That's fine.
Nice. I knew doing crimes would bring Professor Zoom and me together.
Makes sense. Bane and I have the same taste in hobbies,
Did
so no wonder we hit it off.
Giving Bane a mouth, but
Tatiana Perperny,
he's the only character without.
Schlimper, Talenta, right?
He's the only character where it has his mouth covered, so why not do that? I like a bit of variety.
Care for a round of pixel quiz? Here's your first pixelated item. What do you think it is?
That's pancake.
The answer is
LA
fun
gamer.
cake. Next up, your second pixelated item. What do you think it is?
Robot. Toy robot.
The answer is toy robot. And finally, the last pixelated item. What do you think it is?
Man, these things on plates. Oh, damn it. I'm gonna go with the nuts.
The correct answer is
Come
seafood
on.
platter.
Why you gotta serve everything on plates and bowls?
Hey, you can't win them all. But you can get this as a consolation prize, dear.
Great. Let's see what Wanda wants to. She wants something built there.
Do you have a moment? I would just love it if there were a bell right here.
Sure. I can see the other
Well,
bell in the
that's a
background.
big
The other
improvement.
bell is right behind your head. Those bells are too close. The bell right there.
I feel like I heard someone's voice just now.
Get out of that wetsuit. So the only thing happening is Harley Quinn's having a dream. I had a really good stream last time. There's a lot of people watching, not like now. I guess I found the right time. The weekend. Thursday afternoon, probably not so much, eh?
Oh,
Had a few
Same
ideas
dream
for
every night?
little things to make. I like to make a trident for Aquaman.
oh, what's
no,
up?
I know what I'm gonna do right now.
ha ha ha. If you're buying a book, which format do you like best?
Comic book. Ebook.
Backlit books. Huh. What'll they think of next?
I had something I wanted to do. Palette house. There it is. So that I made I got given a crystal. It's gonna be anything. Blank base. I'd like to use it as a stamp. I'd like to turn it into kryptonite. Where is it? There it is. So hopefully it's just a matter of Let's get big old brush and lock the transparency. I'm not really sure how to do this. Let's try bright. First you gotta choose a color. I don't see that doing anything. Let's try dark. Yeah, it's a bit greener. Do I have to say layered? So green and then green. Yeah, here we go. We're making kryptonite. It is showing the circle brush a bit more than I like. I think that's a good day. I think that's good. I don't know about this black at the base. That's kryptonite. Oh, and then we gotta do this, right? Not too much. About bare minimum. It's not as green as I'd like. Alright, tapping the button there. Get all the layers there at once. Yeah, I like that. Done. What kind of thing is this? Well, this is kryptonite, of course. Crypto. Night.
Kryptonite.
Singular. It's mysterious. Yeah, it's not embarrassing. Suspicious. It is also shiny. Striking. Suspicious is the good one there. I like that. Yeah, no, it's lit all the time. Give that to Lex Luthor.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
I don't go to that shop enough to recognize the music. Alright. Let's get one of the super friends. Oh, where's Flash? Where's Firestorm's got some issues. Knot wants to be friends. Maybe this will cheer up Firestorm, whatever his freaking name is. I was just about to play guitar first.
Yeah? Are you alright? Please help me. Don't
When
worry,
friends
I
want
watched
to
a video
get
on this
together.
once.
Wait, what?
I vow to return the favor one day.
What a relief. You're okay?
Yeah, close.
Have to.
So who am I playing guitar to? Where am I? I can hear a guitar. So we're getting to the point where it's very crowded, and there's always something happening, which is cool. So I'd like to. I've got designs for here. If you've ever seen the Hall of Justice, they have a thing in the front. They've got a little like courtyard type area.
I'm Darkseid.
Great to meet ya, but I'm Supergirl.
I think so.
It's my first time hearing the creepy voice through headphones. It's a weird. There's a creepy thing going on there.
Thanks for helping me.
So this is what I don't want. I don't want the heroes and villains to get friends. Look at his friends: Batman, Joker, Aquaman,
Wonderful.
and now Supergirl. They're loving that bell. So this is my villain area. So I said I wanted to make a Bizarro, and I want to do this thing at the front of Hall of Justice. What do I do first?
Milhingle Mectimal. Nah, Kiliana Chippy.
Okay.
Planinamudu.
Firestorm and Wonder Woman are planning smooching. Alright. Bizarro's can be very fun. So, create based on existing me on the island. Superman. I think the square face is good. He's extremely white. I don't know if you heard that. My cat was. Look at my cat Gatsby there. I think. That's good hair. Let's get rid of the face paint for now. Was there a delete option back there? Stop. Remove face paint. And we'll bring that back later. That's good. That's good. One of those characters who there's been so many ways to draw him. There's no real wrong way. Not long hair though. So this or there. This is good. This is good. What about? So that's the. Alright, let's look at these. That's kind of. Good giant. That looks like Conan O'Brien. Why does that look like Conan O'Brien? So that's in there. There's some crazy ones. This isn't really him. That could be him. Oh boy. No. nothing. That's a bit too silly. Alright, let's go back to this. Or this, even. I don't like, that's too much forehead. I like that, a big mess. There was a messier. Was a mess. No, that's the one I'm thinking of. And make his hair a bit. That a little bit messy. Make the mess from all angles. I think that's as far as I want to go. Maybe that. Maybe a big lots of hair. Not tied up either. Where did we go? That one? 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 Alright. Let's go to the eyes. I like a pupilless Bizarro. How's that? Maybe I don't like a pupilless Bizarro. I think our red eyes Bizarro is always good. So that's what Superman had. If I do the upside down of that, which is that, I think that's pretty good. I think the upside down, yeah. Keep wanting to bring it down. It's pretty good. That's pretty good. I think I'd like a unibrow. Yeah. I'm liking it. I like to mess his nose up a bit. So that's that. You need square angles. It's a funny nose. I think that's a good one. Do we go with teeth? 'Cause I don't want him evil. He's not an angry dude. He's just so that it's kind of a smile. I think like a bit of blue on the lips. No. This one, no, I like him having a smile. He's a happy guy. Yeah. It's not real square ears. It's pointy. Yeah. You know what? With the hair, I'd like the subcolor of really dark blue. Yeah. still want to play with the face a bit. I think that's good. Having the nose right. He's a mess. This is going to be fun. I like when I don't have to do face paint. Because then I get to do this stuff. That's good. That's good. Yeah. Yeah. So that is good. That I kind of don't have to change. Yeah. None of that. Maybe black around the eyes. I kind of like the blue-ish. What's this look like in blue? Looks a bit like makeup, doesn't it? What I'm trying to do is just kind of blue as a white, as a shade of white bit. Kind of traditionally how Bizarro is drawn. It just doesn't look right, does it? I don't mind it though. What if it's the more these are more subtle kind of. Maybe that's what I want. I wish there were more options with the lips of the girlish. Although, hang on. Sometimes there's black lips. How does that look? No. Say that's the entire mouth. Nah, it doesn't work. Oh, a little tilty. He looks a bit. Nah. I like him though. Eyebrows. I'd like the unibrow for Bizarro. I like that. Yeah. Well, I didn't go through these. This is where I would probably get the blue shade that I want. So it's kind of got that twice now. Yeah, get rid of this one. You can't actually see that because the eyebrows are there. So these are going above the eyebrow. Right? Oh no. Oh, that's kind of good. If it doesn't have any black, it's just red. You gotta spam chat. It's my only chat. Delete this, please. Ban. Click. Click. None of those things. I want to ban this. Definitely restrict. Yeah, so does that look good with or without? Black or white? I think the white's kind of good and creepy. Black and white. No, black, red, and white. I like it. Yeah, he's good. Why? Alright, so he's based on Superman, so the shape should be the same height. Height and width should be the same as Superman. Bizarro.
My name is Bizarro.
He's male. He is into anything. Anyone? Let's visit my spreadsheet. I think he might have the same birthday as Superman. Which is, of course, 29th of Feb. Let's go. Bizarro. Can I do a search? Bizarro Superman. He's in the Legion of Doom, of course. 27th of the 7th. Why? See, a lot of these I had to make up, and they're not canon. Alright. This is gonna be fun, actually.
My name is Bizarro.
My name is Bizarro.
My name is Bizarro. It's nice to meet you.
I gotta speed
My
all
name-
of these up.
My name is Bizarro. My name is Bizarro. It's
My name is Bizarro. 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 It's nice. My name is Bizarro. 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 My name is Bizarro.
Now here's one where
My
we
name
can
is
mess with the
Bizarro.
delivery.
My name is Bizarro. It's nice to meet you. Today is April 30th. My name is Bizarro. It's not. My name is Bizarro. My name is Bizarro.
Yes.
It's nice to meet you. Today is April 30th, 2026.
Yep.
My name is Bizarro.
Ooh,
It's
that's
nice
messed
to
up.
meet you. Today is April 30th, 2020.
Two or
My
three.
name is Bizarro. It's nice to meet you. Today is April.
No.
My name is Bizarro. It's nice to meet you. My name is Bizarro. It's nice to meet. My name is Bizarro.
It's nice to meet. My name is Bizarro.
This
My
starts
name is
silly.
Bizarro.
A bit faster.
My name is Bizarro. My name is Bizarro.
My name is Bizarro. My name is Bizarro. My name is Bizarro. My name is
I
Bizarro.
need to change the
It's
pronunciation.
my name is Bizarro. It's nice to meet you.
Is he? I'm gonna say no. His movement is quick. He's very honest. Varied. He's chill. He's very quirky.
My name is Bizarro.
I think I changed that just by the tone. Biz Arrow. That's not gonna work.
My name is Bizarro. My name is Bizarro.
Oh.
My name is Bizarro. My name is Bizarro.
B.
My name is Bizarro.
No, but
My name is Bizarro.
B. Hello, Luna Everly. I'm trying to get Bizarro to spell his name. Bizarro.
My name is Bizarro. My name is Bizarro.
Hello, how you doing? You were here in the last, I believe you were looking at the last stream, right? How do I write B? B. Instead of by? B? Sorry?
My name is Bizarro.
It's not Bizarro.
My name is Bizarro.
Yeah, you a Tomodachi fan or Bizarro or a superhero fan? Bizarro.
My name is Bizarro. My name is Bizarro. My name is Bizarro. My name is Bizarro.
Thanks for letting me know. Can't hear me properly. How is this? How is this? Accidentally changed my levels. Making my levels right is it kills me every friggin' stream. Why is this coming through very slowly? Quietly or slowly? Are you? Bizarro.
My name is Bizarro. My name is Bizarro.
This is killing me. Biz?
My name is Bizarro.
You know that's not my voice, right? Maybe I'm speaking too slow.
My name is Bizarro.
That was alright. Hang on.
My name is Bizarro.
Yeah, that's beautiful. How am I now? I think I was probably concentrating too much. This is my bad guys island. I would love them all to move in together. Maybe I have room up here. It's a bit of a mess. I'll have to extend the perimeter. Well, there's good. That's gonna get rid of all that fence. I think I move it all back a bit. So he's gonna leave behind Bane. I may have to do a lot of. Yes, I am into comic.
Hey there.
I've
It's
got all
nice
these
to meet you,
superheroes and
Mr.
supervillains.
I'm Bizarro. I'm an outgoing go-getter who loves
So his
exploring new
outfit's gonna be
ideas. I tend to do whatever comes to mind.
How
I
about
can't
yourself? Are you
wait to
into
start
comic?
living here.
Is that what brings you here?
I really enjoy spending time together.
I wanted to give him still some kind of curl like Superman has, but that's not that important. Hello, me on fire. I know who you are. Yeah, I've started using my face just because I have a green screen now. What's the first thing we're going to feed Bizarro? I write books. I write zines, mini comics. I used to do some stuff for magazines, mainly silly jokes. I'm superhero, never serious. Bizarro, you need some dessert.
Yum.
I need a button that I press and it shows my website, it shows where you can get my stuff. But check out sirive.itch.io and you'll see what I've written. Let's give him a good room. This is good. He'll be really big in it. Have you uploaded any book or magazine on social media? Social media, everything I do kind of gets cancelled. Not what I do, the platform I posted on. If you check out my Tumblr is where I have posted a lot of my stuff. Share your web. Hang on a second. Every time I think I've got all my stuff kind of sorted, I realize I've forgotten something. I do have... Bear with me a second. I have an overlay. Let's pretend I'm not actually ending the show, but if I click over here, this. Sirive on Instagram and Blue Sky. Ive.itch.io is where you can download most of my stuff. Nonstop Ive is where I put these streams afterwards. So, where is that overlay? Plugs is what it's called. Alright. Now let's get back to the game. Now let's add. Plugs. Oh, it's it's not actually. I see what I've done. Let's get back to that. Plugs. Copy. Let's go back to game. Paste. There we go. Next time someone asks, here you go. This is where you can find my stuff. Yes, I am an artist. I call myself cartoonist, more than artist, I guess. So I keep meaning to add my own characters. You can see on the scroll, it was just passed by Tiny the Cowboy. That's one of my guys. And Comics Face, I've added two. My two non-superhero characters I've put in my in this superhero game. So entire room. Bizarro, he's not a graveyard guy. Let me know where, yeah, another comic artist, that's cool. What kind of stuff do you do? For the past maybe 2 years, year and a half, I've been working on the one tabletop role-playing game that I'm trying to make kind of cartoony, as much as a comic book as I can. So I haven't really done comics. One chapter, you gotta start somewhere. Cool. Manga's a thing I'm not as...
Welcome.
What I've read, I've loved. And then I just don't really read. I've kind of grew up... It's because I grew up with superhero comics and it's... you know, you get a tiny bit every month rather than big, fat, huge books, which, yeah, I kind of get overwhelmed with. How many me's? Good question. Good question. They're all scrolling at the bottom there. Over 20. The maximum is 70, and that's insane to me. Just because I log on and you check on everyone. Here we go.
Thank
Just
you
checking
very
on
much.
everyone
Please
and
come
feeding
again.
everyone. It takes so long. So I do this, but with the city wallpaper. Yeah, it's Bizarro. That's Bizarro. I'm gonna make his costume before I do anything else. Luna Everly, send me a link
It
to your
looks great
stuff.
now. Thank you.
And let me know if I can look at it on the stream. I could put you in it. I'm avoiding putting real people. But if you're asking them for it. Alright, where's the island info? 27. I got 27. Quality of life. I don't know what that means. Pushy island vibe. I don't know what that means. Where did he go? Oh, gotta check on Metamorpho. Alright, so I'm trying to get... Alright, so I'm trying to get... Firestorm. Yeah, Firestorm. I'm trying to grab him.
Da.
I'm trying to get them to move in together.
Is this some kind of bit?
Gravity wins again.
Well, this is really, really strange. But I'm sure you'll be fine.
What are they doing?
You know what? I'm going to go ahead and trust you. Please tell no one this happened to me.
I'm so glad you're alright.
I'm so happy with Firestorm's outfit. His headgear, I wish it would have sped up it.
Yeah, grab a snap elbow. Me. Have a grapple.
The demo, yeah, it was great. It feels so.
Do you have a moment?
Feels so depressing to think
I
about.
would just love it if
when
there were a beach lounger right here.
just having the 3 dudes and not really doing much. I made a profile on every single. Yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, I did play apes. But what's annoying is I can't
Thanks.
bring characters
That'll make life
from
on
other
this island a
profiles
million
into this
times
game.
better.
Had to recreate a lot of stuff. And some stuff I just ignore. So this thing they just ask for things to be put places. And I guess that one's not bad. But sometimes it sucks. What's Gnord up to?
Let's play Pixel Quiz? Woof.
You can continue from the demo, but I don't want to play the full game on different profiles. So I continued from one profile, and then the other ones are just sitting there.
Here's your first pixelated item. What do you think it is?
That's a buttered potato.
The answer is buttered potato.
I'm such a elite
Next
gamer.
up, your second pixelated item. What do you think it is?
That's a television. That's a live concert video.
The answer is live concert video. And finally,
I'm
the
enjoying
last
this so much.
pixelated item.
I can't
What
stress.
do you think it is?
That's muscles.
The correct answer is muscles. Congratulations, you won. Time for your prize.
Let's start small. It's like it's perfect for me. I don't know if everyone's gonna love it.
Grab Action Comics #1, Flani Namen. Oh yeah, my darling Lois. What's the plan for tomorrow's date?
Clark,
So
my
these
dear,
two got married.
I
and
want to
had
do
a
some
baby.
doing crimes. So how about
No,
we go to the
don't do
ocean?
crimes.
You read my mind.
Yeah, it's
I
made
dreamed
for
of doing
me.
crimes by the ocean with you for the longest time.
Our love will last a lifetime. We'll be together forever, Clark. My darling Clark. What is it exactly that you love about me, Clark?
I feel like I'm
I
little
swear,
and I'm
you're
playing
so extra,
with my action
Lois.
figures.
But I'll tell you, you looked too cool, the way you were solving mysteries. I knew I had to be with you.
So it really worked. The whole reason I was solving mysteries was to try and get a reaction from you.
Our love will last a lifetime. We'll be together forever, Lois.
My darling Clark, always keeping it real.
So
The first time I met you, I thought you were like a Hall of Justice playset.
Oh, Lois, my one true love. I thought you were just like a knife.
For real,
So
a
this
Hall of
stuff.
Justice playset and a knife.
The whole
a
of Justice
combination that
place
can't
said
be
they
beat.
asked what I
Our love
treasure.
will last a lifetime. We'll be together forever, Lois.
And then they bring it up in the weirdest places. I want to get to making Bizarro's outfit, but everyone's doing stuff.
Do you have a moment? I would just love it if there were a bouncy playground
sure.
right here.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Aw yeah, I love the look of that bouncy playground ride.
Yeah. What's Wonder Woman up to?
You know, I'm starting to be able to tell when you're
She calls
coming,
me Wonder
Wonder
Fella.
Fella. I think Luther is an amazing friend, but I'm kinda wondering. Do Luther and I make a great pair?
No.
What? Really?
Now she's gonna be
fine.
sad. You just went. So, yeah, I can't imagine.
Life sure is interesting. You never know what's around the corner.
I like when you're talking to someone outside, you see cool stuff happening in the background. But 70 would be nuts. Sometimes I just follow one and they'll just make friends with someone. Pretty cool. Firestorm.
Huh? Yo,
Tell me.
I want to try living with
No,
soups.
no. Yeah, Superman and Lois have Superboy. That's their kid, just like in the comics. Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn had a kid. It was messed up, and you can send it away. I just sent it away. That's it. It's like me and Alex are married, and she asked if she wanted to go. I said no. You get to design it. But yeah, it's just like, do you want me to live on the island or do you want me to just I was like, get out of here. They grow up like instantly as well. There's like a little montage and then you change the face. You can't change the face instantly. You name it. Superman's got a house full of super characters, but I'd like Superman to live with. Nah.
You think? Well, I guess I'll give it up for now.
I want. Yeah.
What's
what?
the funniest pun you know, bro?
Paintbrushes are pointless. That's not true. Some have a point. That's the whole point of the. Some whiteboards are remarkable. Yeah. Stairs are up to something. I can't think on the top of my head, but stairs are up to something.
I don't get it, but I feel like the joke is staring me in the face.
I'm seeing so many anime people make anime stuff that I've been looking at so much stuff that I reckon I recognize maybe 10% of the characters that people make. Oh no, he loves mac and cheese.
I'm eating for two.
Firestorm is 2 people combined. That's why he says that. He's not pregnant. This is what happens when you feed them their favorite food.
It's so good.
I found maybe 3 or 4 characters' favorite foods. I was planning on mixing and matching different stuff, but I just went a bit nuts with the superheroes. What's he watching? He's watching sports. Batgirl. I'm really proud of her little zips.
You're
in her
looking
costume.
chipper, mister. I want someone to talk to, but someone who can't really talk
Oh.
back. Maybe a pet will do.
She's never had a pet, but it's letting me just create something. Be nice if she had a little bat. I had to look up this thing. It's like a dandelion thing, but in Japan it has its own kind of mythology that it's a pet and it's got powers and stuff. That was pretty cool. What if I give you I might make you a little bat. She was in the wheelchair for a bit. And then, yeah, a whole mess happened where they went back to a younger version of her. So she was in a wheelchair for a bit. I'd like to start with a little base. Like, can I change this into a bat? Yeah, I could just put any animal and then just put a bat mask on them. So you got filters over here. Over here. You can mess around. Batman animated series is really good. I found out I had the DVDs. I don't think I ever watched them. I got a friend's HBO, so I was watching his few things. Oh, that's... No, I know what to do. Yeah, I just seriously maybe it was less than a month ago threw out all of my videotapes. It's not something you can sell or anything like that. Yeah. So I'm gonna steal the symbol. Try and center it. I used to tape so much stuff, and I would watch them. But man, I wish I knew I didn't have to. I wish I could just knew about DVDs were gonna happen, and then streaming. I recently watched all of Batman Beyond, and that, because I didn't really watch that at the time. I don't even know if they showed it on free to air here. That's pretty good. I think at the time I just didn't like that it wasn't the original, wasn't thanks. I have someone's HBO and they got all the animated series on it. It's weird what they do and don't have. I watched all the Justice League on there, and then they got rid of it. So yeah, Batman Beyond was good. Oh, that's 1 pixel? Oh, because of Alright, that's gonna be very pixely. That's alright. Just have to go over it all again. don't have I want to watch the old Super Friends cartoon, and they don't have that anywhere. And even it's like the pirate streaming sites, they don't have it either. Which is fine. Like, it's not that important, but because I'm making my superhero game, and I just want to watch as much of that stuff as I can. This isn't gonna look very great. Yeah. It's happened a few times where I try and reuse something and it's like, yeah, as soon as you rechange the size, it's like anything. It's like when you're making a drawing, you gotta friggin' be careful of the resolution and stuff, except there's no real options here. Yeah, I know who this is, PDB. Sometimes, I think this happened last time I streamed. I just had to be really careful of saying names out loud. It's probably a good thing to kind of keep in practice. Thing is, bats. Don't know if they look that good. Don't know if they look. Actually, yeah, it probably makes sense if it's more. It's gonna be more bat-like than the actual symbol. Yeah, that's good. And the thing is, you only ever have to draw one side because you can flip. There's no symmetry tool, but there's a flip tool. Yeah, this bit, that line's a bit straighter than I'd like, but let's give it some eyes. Thanks, it's pretty much everything I put into this and my set, like it was just lead up to this game. I went a bit crazy way looking forward to this game. So I had another monitor for a while, but I got my capture card back off. Mio had it for a while and he didn't use it. I got a ring light. I got a bunch of stuff. I got a switch. I've got a different switch mount so that I can, what's it called? Switch dock. So I can just move it back and forth from the lounge room to this, and then I had to get an HDMI switcher to make things. So yeah, I'm happy with how it is now. Nothing was too pricey. Like the monitor, I got the monitor and the mic a while ago. Yeah, like probably the most expensive thing was I got a second monitor and a mic, and together that was less than 200, which and that's like the most I spent on it. I got a Stream Deck a while ago, and it was I don't use it that much. It's meant to. It was handy when I was not using my face on camera. But I don't regret it. It's nice to have. This is meant to be the nose, but I don't like it. This is too scary. It should be cute, but yeah, that's a bit better. I guess I don't need the teeth. Yeah, that's good. That's gonna be a bet. I bet I see a photorealistic friggin' bat.
Bat.
So this is called mysterious or fierce. Well, let's make it fierce. Movement. I don't know what the difference between floating and gliding is. Oh, what do bats say? How are my levels? Floating sits in one spot.
Bat.
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 That first one. Yeah, it's fine. Gliding, floating. I'm gonna go with gliding. It looks so pixely again. You have to buy your own stuff.
Welcome.
And that's another one for Batman, and another one for Robin, maybe.
Thank you very much.
You can edit them, yeah. There's a lot of stuff I've had to, like, go in and change a lot. Cool. Now if we just watch her... Oh. I think you've got everything you need. So she's got a walk, a stand, I don't have her... She doesn't have an eating style. She's a saver. I like the thing I liked about the demo is I got
I
to,
feel a little different.
It took me so long to get Batman right.
If I'm being
I
honest,
had the actual
my eyes
game,
are
I
my
would've
least favorite
bothered.
feature.
And that just, yeah, I learnt a lot about drawing in the game. Souffle.
Yum.
I'm hearing a lot of sounds through the headphones that I don't usually hear. when she ate it, made a really cool sound. Yeah, there we go. Cool.
You're pretty scary.
You asked for it, and also you're dressed like a bat. Bizarro, I need to make your outfit.
Huh? Hello? I feel like I could use a style update. You know, something new to wear.
Yeah, there are random, so you just gotta keep giving it different things. And when you find their favorites, they don't like eating them twice in a row. So it's a bit funny. My favorite food in the game is Greek salad. Alright, now, Bizarro. The thing about Bizarro, there's been so many. No one really draws him the same. So I'm free to kind of do whatever. He's gotta be darker though. Yeah, you just give them random stuff until they find a favorite. Yeah, my maze. Greek salad, I'm alright with. It's not my favorite. I think the only difference is it makes their happiness go big, and that just means they level up faster. What am I gonna do here? Let's make this a lighter yellow. And when you give them their least, they got two least favorite foods, their happiness actually goes down. So it's like they have uses, they have a point to them. Just kind of making this a bit ugly. Sometimes Bizarro just has a backwards S, and I don't know if I like that. But it would have been easier. Just a bit jaggedy. Yeah, I'll see Supergirl. You excited for Lobo? Yeah. There's a new Lobo comic. There's just been 2 issues so far. It's kind of fun. Yeah, I reckon they did it just in time for the movie. This isn't ugly enough. Yeah. I'll give this a bit of a nut. Yeah, that movie's based on a comic that was pretty good. Like, they don't usually base it on actual stories, but they did with this. So put this in the cape. Maybe a little. Ah, crap. No, this is alright. So, this should be yellow. Okay, it's touching there. Yeah. Let's make that a bit nicer. That's green. Greens and yellows are very close. What about this? Nope. That's white. Yeah, it's gonna be good. I saw a thing where he was like, when he was called in for Aquaman, he just assumed he was gonna be Lobo. He's like, they obviously, and then it didn't happen until years later. Let's rip this up a bit. I'd like to make a Lobo. I don't really love him that much lately, but yeah, it'd be fun to make, yeah. Fun to make a few not superheroes, but still in the world. This is good. Yeah, messy. I'd like to rip the sleeves and stuff. No, I think that's good enough. A little tattered. Alright, thanks for tuning in. Yeah, if you like what you see, buy the game. It's a bit of a time sink. But also you don't have to be putting this much effort into it. You don't have to be a sicko about it.
Bizarro top.
Yeah. That was, yeah, leading up to this, I couldn't think about big games. I couldn't think about big things. Vampire Crawlers, I played the demo, I really want to play that. I get into Vampire Survivors kind of recently-ish, and that was great. Yeah, it's definitely the thing I would play after this, if there's ever an after this. Did I just... No, it's okay. Yeah. It was... Yeah, I really liked it. I really liked what I played of it. No, not really that into dungeon crawly, but I don't know what it, but yeah, it's just something about that that really got to me. The first one or the second one? Oh, I've not played the board game. I haven't played any board games lately. First, yeah, I never finished the first one. I didn't put that much time into it. It's one of those ones that was free. Like the PS Plus, it was free, and I played a bit, but I can see myself sinking a lot of time in that. Seemed very suited to a board game, yeah. Oh. I gotta be playing more games. There's a games place that opens right near us. I play tested some guy's game, some stranger, was great. Alright, see ya. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good day, etc. That was fun. Alright. Should mess up his boots too. See. So I want to cut and paste Superman's thing, but I need to match the colors of that. How do I get that? Alright, I just make that really small, I suppose. Yeah, okay. Fill this red. This yellow is tiny yellow. So I made it pale. Yeah, that's fine. Alright, that's way easier than drawing the whole thing. Yeah, what can I do about making it a bit bizarro-y? Maybe I actually put the belt loop. The belt. No. I think this is going to be alright. like to put tears in there to see his legs and stuff. Maybe the boot has. Get that to it. Is that silly? I don't like that. I think this is gonna be alright. A ripped cape is good enough. This is a Bizarro pants. Whoops. I like having more villains.
Bizarro pants.
And also, there's so many Batman villains already here. Looking forward to this guy flying around, meeting the other baddies, meeting Superman, meeting Luthor. I'm really struggling to put a lid on it, but there we go. But while I'm here, do I have red boots? Ah, but I do. I don't think that's the red color. Yeah, I am buying them anyway. Maybe these. Oh, there we go. Me on fire playing Vampire Crawlers. That's fine. I don't expect anyone to watch all the way through. These are crazy. Maybe some socks. Plain red socks. It's a bit dark. No, these ones. That's pink. Still. Did I just buy these? I did. Alright, now let's see if I can craft an outfit. Tuck that in. Oh yeah, look at that. Look at that cape. And what? Nope. Nope. Yeah. Let's try socks first. No, no. Alright, let's give him socks anyway. These ones that I've got lots of, and yeah, that's good. Beautiful. Mwah. Mwah.
Nice weather we're having.
Let's check in on people, and then we give him friends.
Huh. It's super to see you. Who in Team Metropolis best represents a nice little LARPer? Let's ask my roommates.
Yeah.
I'll round everyone up.
They asked me who the last person I met was, or something like that. And the
On
last
three,
was a nice little
say the first name that comes to mind when you think of a nice little LARPer in Team Metropolis. 1, 2, 3. Kara,
Me.
Superman,
I would say he
Me.
likes.
Lois.
Did anyone say the same one twice?
Which member of Team Metropolis is the most like a nice
Lois, I
little
guess.
larper? There were differences in opinion, but being forced to choose, we landed on Lois.
What an honor.
I'm glad I got everyone's opinions.
Superman, I don't know what to give him. Great Rail, Great Krypton. These are things he says. Up and away. Sad, I'm super sad. Really running out of things, man. I think he would be good at. I want to see him dance, actually. Yeah. I want to see him dance.
Thanks. I'll check it out later.
CC Comogram. April. Philadelphia
What's
sweater.
Batman doing?
Hey, Chroma.
Who are they a fan of?
Pleasure to meet you all. You may know me by my forum nickname, Trendy Canort. I'm glad we could get together for this in-person Serapolis stream meetup.
My forum nickname is LOL Maestro
You're talking about
Metamorpho.
me. You're talking about the
I haven't
stream.
told my family I'm such a big Serac live stream fan yet. My nickname is Professor Batman. All I want to do today is engage in some deep conversations about my Serac live stream.
What's this?
I'm Firestorm, but you may know me as the Serapolis Stream Whisperer. I run a fanfic site about my Serapolis stream.
I think live stream.
My friend was borrowing my Serac live stream,
Live
so often
stream.
I eventually made her buy her own. Sure, I get that. It's like, buy your own Serac live stream. In some friend groups, it's considered rude to even ask to borrow someone else's.
I made everyone in my family buy 3.
That's the stream right there.
Serapolis stream has brought my family together in a way that nothing else ever has or will.
Did you see the article about the Serac live stream 2.0 going on sale?
What?
Ugh. Not this again. That's just a rumor. People need to stop spreading it.
If it's just a rumor, then how come I was able to pre-order a dozen already?
It's not real until you can show me a Serapolis stream with a 2.0 sticker on it.
He said live stream.
I recommend the Serac live stream to literally
He's
every
saying live
person I
stream
meet.
now.
Every person I even see.
Eyes.
Even if I have to run through traffic and yell it into their face.
Yes, yes. Everyone must know.
Everyone should experience Serapolis stream ownership. I carry around a Serapolis stream in the hopes that I can give it away.
Well, you're a true champion of the Serac live stream.
Is it an accent thing?
Champlity,
Maybe there is accents in this
too.
game.
Fantasilla, Kylan
I'd like to
right.
clip that. Post that on my socials.
Howdy. I want to try living with Joker. You think? Well, I guess
Want
I'll
Bane
give
to
it up
live with
for
Joker?
now. I'm low-key obsessed with Wonder Woman's hairstyle. It's so stylish.
You look a little hungry.
Yum.
I wish I had some snacks. This is the first time I haven't had snacks nearby. Look at him and his horse.
Hello?
You look hungry too.
I've been considering changing up
Huh.
my hairstyle.
Sure.
What sort of hairstyle would be good
It's
on
easy
me?
to undo. Something artistic.
Okay. Then I'll change my hairstyle soon. Look forward to the new me.
Did I not feed
Nothing
you
beats
today?
the sense of satisfaction I get from working hard and getting the job done right.
My mic's nowhere near my mouth. Here we go. Alright, we gotta feed you. Greek salad.
Yum.
Peach.
Yum.
I've got to take a little screenshot of Bizarro to put in the bottom scroll there. So many issues here. Alright, Supergirl's having a dream.
Hello. My room could use a new vibe.
Yeah. I think books with. I think the wallpaper stays. I don't have a spare books room.
Welcome.
What was my weekly special? That's right. I look forward to getting better rooms.
Thank you very much.
I like this as well.
Thank you very much. Please come again.
Gotta change Aquaman's voice, I reckon. And then go back to this. Yeah, that's him. Wish there was computers, like a computers room. There's an office, but that's not what I mean.
Yeah, this is different. Thank you. I aim to be known as someone who always gets the job done.
You'll notice that. Mission accomplished. You get zucchinis.
Yum.
What's left for you to do? Got no walking cell. Did I give him a computer? I didn't. He needs a computer. Laptop.
Thank you.
Oh, Alex. What are you doing, Alex?
E,
At the front
do
of
you have a
Arkham
moment?
Asylum. You gonna want me to build something there?
I would just love it if there were a bell right here.
Yeah, okay. If anyone escapes, you ring that bell. Hey, what's that? Is that an actual missing phantom? No.
That's so satisfying. Thank you. I love living on Supertown.
So we got 3 bells now. Yeah, it works next to the warning sign. Alright. Supergirl's having a dream.
Protector of Supertown's peace. Ally of justice. Supergirl, the Ives' famous bowl of burgers master, is on the scene.
That's my famous bowl of burgers. It's funny how much superhero language shows up that I didn't do.
same dream every night.
Hope you're hungry, Supergirl.
Oh, what's up? Life tip, don't go around whistling loudly at night.
Supergirl, it's just what you dreamed of. It's my famous
Yum.
bowl of burgers. What else was I gonna make? I did a Bizarro. I've gotta make that area look nice. What you got? You got a lot of this stuff. I think she does flip out when she's angry.
Oh, I feel a little different.
Well, no one's asking for stuff. Let's just a little bit of housekeeping. Get the cursor off that and then screenshot this Bizarro picture to put at the bottom. Put in my little scroll. I went, whoa. I hope you didn't hear that. Bizarro hasn't met anyone. Let's make Comics. Comics Face is going through something.
Huh? Hey? I was talking to Harley Quinn, but things just didn't click, you heard?
You're hungry again. I fed these guys not long ago. Celery is not very filling,
In my mouth for this?
but it is his favorite.
So, you'll link with Shark.
We don't need to see this animation again, do we?
It's so good.
What are these two talking about? Again, no, he's good. I like giving him clothes. He can be a Viking too.
Thank you, you heard?
A dessert. A waffle.
In my mouth for this?
Hello, Mary. How are you going? Were you here? No, it's his first time chat.
Overlaps.
Limit.
Filter flat combo.
Alright.
Harley Quinn, good afternoon.
Haha, Comics Face.
What brings you to the game? I'm doing well. I love when I get time to just play this game. Oh, Bane was sniffing
Nice
at
to see
the
you. I thought I'd share this with you.
It's I've
Oh,
magazine.
that's too kind. I couldn't possibly accept it.
Please, I insist.
So how you doing?
But
You're
it
a
looks so
Tomodachi
valuable.
live fan,
I just can't.
superheroes fan.
I have too many.
I appreciate the thought, and that's plenty for me.
Nonsense.
They gotta fight.
Devil,
Oh no.
What a terrible stench.
Sniffer. Yeah, grab and snap elbow. Sneeze.
What's up with Bane?
There's no doubt Supertown gained some prestige points after this was placed here.
To toilet.
This has a totally different vibe than, say, a gun. Everyone should try saying public toilet at least once. It just rolls off the tongue.
Public toilet.
I just can't stop singing its praises.
I think we'll be waiting a while.
See, they were taking photos, but also they could have been wanting to use the toilet. I want Bane to me. What did it look? Oh, that was just an animation. They're not actually there. So Bizarro is the guy I just added. Yeah, I'm feeling good. It's the weekend for me.
Huh? Hello?
This is my chill out.
I've been thinking
It's a
too
very
hard.
good game to play.
My head feels all fuzzy inside. Help me clear my mind.
Yeah, I just spent a while just drawing his costume and
You. I feel so much better now.
That's my mode of chilling out. I might edit him a bit more. He's looking good. So I want him to fly around. Yeah, any game where you're making things is good. That's my kind of... That's my favorite mechanic, if I can create a thing in a game.
I feel like I'm becoming my
That's
true
all
self
this game
more
is,
and
really.
more.
I love to make stuff. I was saying before, it feels like I'm playing with little action figures and I can create them myself. I don't stream daily. I tried to do weekly and it's a struggle. I will try and do it again this weekend. Mainly because I'll be going away. Just dropped a photo so you can watch the stream, yeah. Yeah, please follow. Good. Thank you. Thanks for popping by. I'm always up for more followers. Thank you. I'm trying to get villains to be friends.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Why is he in his
I'm
jogging outfit?
Bizarro.
Hello there, Bizarro. I'm known as Professor Zoom.
Rather funny videos. Funny numbers.
His room has smelled like lobsters lately.
Valley Earth Super Lady, want this glitter piece?
So Jonah Hex. Speckle happen boober mockixy.
Look at us.
Look at us. This game is great. Thank you, Josie.
Bloody.
Why it's allowing me to follow you?
Kindalanda. Shorty. Yeah.
Is it not allowing me to follow you? I'm not sure what you mean. You should be allowed to follow me. You wouldn't be able to subscribe because I'm not. What's the word? What's the word? I'm not an affiliate. Are you able to follow me? I'm not. Thanks for joining, Josie.
We could play no repeats if you're up for it.
Did you just pop in to say the game is great and then leave? Alright, I gotta concentrate.
No
here.
repeats. Food. Beans on toast.
I haven't seen that in this game yet.
Buttered potato.
Pineapple. Thank
Cherries.
you.
Poke.
I can't. Pizza.
Cheeseburger.
Lasagna.
Oatmeal cookie. Ah, oatmeal
quick.
cookie is a repeat. That was wonderful.
So yeah, I got a superhero theme going on here.
Congratulations.
I've got
You
a few
won.
OCs.
Time for your prize.
More of my own characters here. Glad I could help. I'm enjoying streaming. It's the kind of thing I'm going to be playing this game anyway. Why not do it in front of the computer? When I'm having a work day, I can't do that because I play for like an hour. But if I'm
Do
in
you
for
have
the
a
long
moment?
haul, why not?
I would just love it if there were a public bench right here.
Yeah. That's probably a good spot. Look at Bane in
That's
the
so
background. there. Did you
satisfying.
see that?
Thank you.
He's doing a nice
I
little-
love living on Supertown.
It's behind that bubble. Look at him. Yeah, just didn't. I definitely I
Oh,
play on
well.
a daily basis. Don't get me wrong. I play this every day, but I don't stream every day.
Huh. Hey there. I want something that leaves a sour taste in my mouth.
Sour?
Really?
I don't think I have sour food. I don't
Welcome.
think I have sour food. Do I have to create something? What are we thinking? Ruined meal? I think I have to create a sour food. So Monday to Wednesday, I work and I play after work, but I'm not in any condition to stream. So I do like an hour or so, hour two. Do I have to read all these descriptions? I'm gonna have to make something
Please come
for
again.
Flash. Now, plates and bowls suck because then they show up in. I see people make cigarettes in these. I have been thinking about that lately. Last weekend I had a lot of followers, which was exciting. Hello. So I've added, since the last stream, here we go, we got Batgirl right there. Since last stream I made Flash, Mr. Terrific, Professor Zoom, Reverse Flash, it was just easy, and Bane, and today I made a Bizarro Superman. And right now, the Flash is asking for something sour. And I don't have anything like that in the shop. So let's make something up. A box up. To me, sour is little green, light green, like a sour apple. Hey, Y for okay. Come on, man. Alright. What are we gonna stamp on there? So much potential. Is your visual identity matched to your gameplay? You mean like this visual identity? I used to do PNG tuber, play as a 3D thing, but I don't know. I wasn't loving that. Overall, like everything here, I've tried to do a comic kind of style. What else says sour? This? Oh, it's a stamp. I'm struggling here. Let's just put our food. This is a box of haha. I'll allow this. Custom branding. No. Hang on. I've got an idea. It's just a box of Binnacle sour apples. Can I... see, I should have done that first. I am pretty curious, but also I like doing it all myself. What have I done here? Thank you. Yeah, that's what I'm going for. Not just what I'm going for, but I don't know if I know how to be any other way. I keep pressing the wrong button there. I appreciate it. If I'm watching someone and I can help them, I would be doing what you think. I'll be talking like you're talking. Don't know about that white line. I'm not gonna care that much about it. Putting too much time into this one food request. So my idea is something but sour. Something that isn't sour. Here we go. I wish I could draw just on the donut. So we've got 3 donuts on the box. And it's called... Didn't change that. Let me change the color first. White. Donuts. It's not just called donuts though. It's called donuts. But sour. Now, can I? Maybe I don't need to be doing this. Nah. Donuts but sour. Well, you know what kind of food this is. It's donuts but I didn't change the silhouette, so if that shows up in the silhouette game, I'm kind of screwed.
Donuts but sour.
Plural. Taste sour. So I think that's just you just click that for the, and he's gonna like it. Is it a sweet treat if it's sour? It's none of the other things. These are room temperature, size. I love bread. Our bread is right there. Yeah, no, you're right. I like when it fills their tummy.
Welcome.
Let's get. Look, I've got the money. Let's get 10 of these.
Thank you very much.
Flash, you better love this.
Yum.
He eats so fast. There was a Flash comic where he says,
Which is worth more, a newspaper or a zine?
never make something that takes longer to make than it is to eat. And I just blew up that rule. So I'd like to, I need to do island builder. Alright. So, this is the bad guys. And Bizarro, he's just on his own there. I don't like this layout. I like having the throne with the bad guys. Bizarro, you can live here. So I said last stream I wasn't gonna do too many Batman characters, but then I need to fill up Arkham Asylum, so I made Bane. Who else do I make? There's a lot of Two-Face chat last time. That's not symmetrical. But if I move that back like where it's, yeah, I need the fence. Where do I put this throne? Let's just put it here for now. I can't put it there. Damn it. I need to expand this island. What if they're all in a line instead of a block like this? What do I do here? I think this is good. I don't like bunching them up too much, but they're bad guys. if it expands there, and then I can do another row down there. Yeah, I'm alright with this. Alright. Nope. This gives me a lot of space there. That's fine. And then the throne. I don't know what else to put in a bad guy, like a villain place. Maybe those torches, tiki torches. Let's expand this. Yep. I redid my Arkham a bit too. Just, it's still... I'm not a big fan of how the textures look. When I make a sign, it looks good. See the Arkham Asylum sign. But if I put that text on the actual building, a penguin would be good. I'm waiting for a top hat. No, I need to expand it even more. I can't put a fence next to there. It's gonna be big. Right. So I'm hoping they all move into one house together. Just to make room. Whoop. No, come on. Penguin will be good. Clayface, just I like the idea of big dudes. I wish Bane was a little bigger in the game. Riddler's fun. Maybe a bit too normal. Clayface, and there's a lot of ways I can go with that too. You could just make him look like a normal guy, technically, right? I always do this where I make a thing and then I can't get it symmetrical. Oh, again. No. What if this is a little... And every day they can choose who gets to sit there. I think I'm gonna put those flaming torches there.
Welcome.
Ah, different colors. Let's get the red one then. How do I put? Oh wait. Yeah, no, that's a different thing. I guess that's a bit evil. Different colored thrones. No. What's the bad guys like? I think a warning sign as you walk into this area. Oh, red lighting. Trash cans, no, alright. I've got enough fences. Rocks. Sure. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Alright. I think these on either side. paving side in here. This in front. Red. Nope.
What? Please come again.
Sorry. Red light. Didn't really need red lights and torches though. I can make red. We can put the path all red. Yeah, and then the rocks. I wish I could put them yeah, I can put them behind. Darker rocks there and there. I like it. I don't know about the gold. I don't think the gold paving is very evil. Is there gravel? Metal? Let's see. Nah. Gravel. No. I wish there was a darker gravel. There's cobblestone, that's not. Dirt. Asphalt. Yeah, I've only used asphalt in paths, but what does it look like? Yeah, that's dirty. Don't follow this yellow brick road. Alright. Should they have one through each? No, I like the idea of they have to kind of compete. And then there's this space. I don't mind a blank space. What have I got? What have I got? I actually lied about a picnic area. It's the bad guys. We gotta talk about stuff. Where are the picnic seats? There we go. No. What color
Welcome.
do we have? Red for bad guys.
Thank you very much.
On the dark ground. Yep. You gotta have a place to discuss all your evil plans. Won't let me put it there. So the hope is they sit here
Welcome.
when it's dark out.
Thank you very much.
Bells can be pretty evil. No. What different light? No, not a lighthouse. There's evil tree. There's not really anything evil in there. Let's put another rock there. On the corner, actually. That's all I have. Alright. So that was just me setting up Bizarro's house. Bizarro. Red. Do I cut this off from the mainland? Yeah. Look at this evil rocker. Look at this suspicious one there. I think I'm gonna cut it off from the land, but and that kind of ruins this road. Alright, batch. Select everything. I'll have to do the paving again. I can't wait till this expands. Look, I'm fine with that. I like this trick of just, you can just eye drop. Oh, the fence. Oh no, the fence is good. The fence is good. I just have to. Yeah. The whole point was deleting everything around it. Except the path. There we go. No longer attached to the mainland. I have to remember what this looked like now. Okay, that's actually pretty good. What's happened here? Ah, right, that path wasn't. Yeah, okay, that's okay. It's all good. It's no longer that corner where that rock was, so I do this, and I move this, that picnic table. It's no longer where it was. Something's missing. There was another red light there. Maybe I don't like the red lights, actually. Not in here, anyway. Welcome back. I get rid of that one. I get rid of this. I can't wait to see some city on there. Alright. So now this bit looks blank. That's all good. So you can walk around the back. You got a new level. I'm just redoing the bad guys island. It started as just making room for Bizarro, but now so hopefully they move in together. Bane, I want to move into Arkham. Is this? Yeah, this is alright. Anything else I need to work on here? Arkham's good. This is Gotham. Batgirl and Robin. Batman lives with the other superheroes. I'd love them to all live in one house. Maybe a Gotham sign I was thinking about. This is fine for now. There's so much space here. I did these trees. I like when they walk down there, but I don't like when there's times where I have to talk to them and it's like, they're all in shade. That's kind of cellmates, yeah. I don't like my Arkham. I want it to be a bit more gothic-y. It just looks like an office building now. Maybe towers. This is the Hall of Justice where the Super Friends live. I cannot put text on there. It looks rubbish. This is a bit. If you look up the Hall of Justice, they have a little area in front. I'd like to draw that at some point. This is Aquaman's house. He just has a hole where he jumps into the water. Metamorpho, this is terrific. Justice League is just Johns and Flash. Just thinking about my gameplay. Yeah, it's a bit Minecrafty, blocky. I like. I'm not a big first person person. So to make stuff and not like in Minecraft, I can't deal with that. I can't be doing that. I love how creative it is, but this is much more my speed. So these two, Justice League and Super Friends, I want them to combine. I want them all to live in here, which is easy. It's easier than it sounds, but I can't really force it. I just have to wait. This area I'm not a fan of. Maybe it needs to be bigger. And these little pools also. I've got this pool. So these are kind of pointless unless they're in a big park. And I made these two parks recently. I like my autumn park. Very red. This is good. I just moved that recently. Bad guys on the right. Gotham's on the right. So I guess that's Metropolis. I could put that there. And that would give me more space for the restaurant. I'm happy with... So this is the first park I made, and then half of it is stuff that they request and just put there. This is my backyard. That bonfire looks at bonfires in autumn. I think they go together. So there's a lot of empty spaces where people have moved out. I think this is good. And I want Bizarro to be friends with any bad guy. Let's make Bizarro and Professor Zoom. Oh, they've already met.
What was it that Mr. and I were talking about recently?
Bizarro and Luthor. Where's Luthor? Yeah, he's ready to meet.
Hey, nice to meet you. I'm Bizarro.
Hey, you said Bizarro. Well, I'm Lex Luthor.
I didn't know if anyone was watching. I was just getting to pronounce Bizarro like that. Oh, Bizarro's into smooching.
Batman tomorrow. So
Really happy with that design.
I had a fun time with Lex Luthor, and if I'm being honest, it's all thanks to you, Mr.
They gonna smooch?
Salad Flava. Dance one.
Alright, who's got issues?
Whimper. Get it kept rolling.
Flash wants to play a game.
Huh. Feeling bored. How about a game of Shadow Quiz? Wanna play?
Sure.
Here's your first mystery, Shadow. What do you think it is?
I think that's a water flea.
The answer is... Water flea.
Gross.
Next, your second mystery, Shadow. What do you think it is?
Egg.
The answer is... Hard-boiled egg. And finally, the last mystery, Shadow. What do you think it is?
I hate the plate ones, but no,
The correct answer is... Roast duck.
I had 3 plate ones at once there. What are we serving with that roast duck there? Looks like shriveled tomatoes and half an apple. What's that green thing at the... We'll never know.
Congratulations, you won.
I'm so happy with my flash. I gave
Time
him
for
the
your
jogging
prize.
DVD.
Go ahead, pick Pick one.
So he runs around. It's not a quirk. You have to do that. But then sometimes he wears trucking outfits. I hate it. I missed out on the alpaca. 7. I got 7 problems happening. This is 2.
Do you like me? Yes or no? Answer quick. Oh,
She's married.
maybe. You're okay. I did specify yes or no. You're the only person I'll ever tell this to, but I've got a secret rootin' tootin' cowboy side to me. Oh, that's a secret. I always hear folks talking about it. What now? I just had a great idea. We should go do karaoke after this. Oh, sorry. I don't sing. Who doesn't sing?
It'd be great if there was a karaoke place. People really miss the concert hall, I get it. But what if it was karaoke instead?
Take that.
Let's spar.
It's no use. That's just a hologram.
Hmm.
Oh, he trackled the channel ribbon.
Alright, what else we got?
My love Hondi pays it tomorrow. Brongle. I'm a fuckle.
Mr. Terrific. I mainly made Mr. Terrific so I can make his floating T-spheres.
Do you have a
They look
moment?
pretty cool. What do you want to build?
I would just love it if there were a pinwheel right here.
Sure. Bane wants to play a game.
That's so satisfying. Thank you. I love living on Supertown.
Bane's so cool.
I've got a fun idea. Wanna play Pixel Quiz?
How cool is that voice?
Here's your first pixelated item. What do you think it is?
A classical album.
The answer is classical album. Next up, your second pixelated item. What do you think it is?
Olives.
The answer is olives. And finally, the last pixelated item. What do you think it is?
Schnitzel.
The correct answer is
The secret to Bane is you
schnitzel.
can't get eyes like that. Those are they're eyebrows. So he'll never blink, but he will still do expressions. That's a big schnitzel.
Congratulations, you won. Time for your prize.
Let's
Go ahead, pick
go.
one.
I was smaller, so let's go middle. That's alright. Oh, what's up with Bane? I haven't seen this.
Fine. So dizzy.
Oh no. It's fun to still
Interesting.
see new things. It does get a bit
Same.
repetitive, but oh. Alright, let's get a bad guy. I want all the bad guys to be friends. Not Bane, not Bizarro's got stuff going on here. I need more bad guys that aren't
Please, Hick, help me.
I've never seen a case this bad before.
I'm gonna be okay, though. Right? You're so kind.
Anyone would have helped.
Yeah, rabbit cat go. Watch the money. Kafka, Candy. Oh.
They were gonna make friends. Yeah. Should
Huh?
stay tuned.
Oh, James Face. I want someone to talk to, but someone who can't really talk back. Maybe a pet will do?
I have an idea for a pet for you. Alright. This shouldn't take too long. Is there a stamp that kind of looks like a person at all? Oh. That's exactly what I was thinking. Alright. Let's change the background. Yeah. Now. You're wearing your helmet. I was gonna just put his face on there. Yeah, sure, why not? Hang on. Alright. Person? That's good and little. His own face. With a big head. No, his own face. Draw. If you say luck transparency, it means I can't draw outside the lines. Actually, let's just fill that in. Let's fill that in. Nope. Yes. He's just gonna have a little version of himself. Amazing. What else? What else can I do to this guy? I realized, where is it? The egg is a pet. You can give someone a pet egg. I think something on his chest. A zip? I didn't know there was a zip stamp. That would have been handy. I didn't know there was a zip stamp. That's good. How small is he gonna be? This is a mini. Comics face. Bow tie would have been good.
Mini comic space.
He's charming. He's funny. Trotting? Hopping. I want to see what trotting is. Oh boy. I think it's gonna be very Pokemon where he says his own name.
Comic space.
Oh,
Comic space.
Comic space.
Comic space.
Comic space.
oh,
Comic space. Comic space. Comic space. Comic space. Comic space.
I think that's it. Or
Comic space.
Comic space. Comic space.
don't know why bubbling would.
Comic space.
Yeah. Look, why not make him glow? Maybe flashing? No, you know what? Just a normal man. Oh, it's so pixely on that screen. Freaks me out.
Welcome.
Alright.
Thank you very much.
Oh, he's so small. He's like a little toy. I was thinking of making an action figure of myself to give to superheroes. Because I've got action figures of them. Look at that. I want to see you walk around with him. Alright. Okay, that's enough of that.
Huh. Hello? I need something really worth
Oh, I have
bragging
not
about.
given him anything.
I need a treasure that'll knock everyone's socks off.
I know exactly what to give him. I didn't give this to anyone. I forgot kryptonite. Oh. Fine.
What fantasy monster do you think you could take in a fight, Mr.
Fantasy monster that I think I could take and fight none of these. Maybe a goblin. What are some other fantasy monsters? Like a troll? I could take a troll.
Troll? A troll? Well, you're way braver than me.
I haven't given him the floating thing I need. Oh no, did he? Harry there. I see him and his kryptonite.
What a mystical thing.
Cool. What's happened to Bane?
Rather fast food innovation. Long novelty.
I wish the good guys and bad guys would stop making friends, but
Pardon me, could I have a moment? My name is Bane.
Good to
if I
meet
still
you,
dance in the
Bane.
background.
I'm Metamorpho.
Oh my goodness. They're having a dance off in the background.
I've never seen what you're down with that. Channel Metamorpho Talk. My God Magazine and Tappy.
So I got 27 characters and the maximum is
Sally,
70.
you are so handsome. Want to
There's gonna be stuff like that going on
Now
all
have
over
a
the
zingle ringle. Yeah. Shaman grab a backpack.
Don't
Sing one
stare, Bane.
shabba grandma.
That's my wife.
Are you alright?
I'm glad you're not hurt.
I get it. I don't think they've even met. I think that was their first meeting.
Who is that? Wonder Woman, huh? I think I'm falling in love with Wonder Woman.
I don't want to stand in the way of love. Although they do fight when they're in love. Look, it's just
Yeah, I
one-sided
think
for
you're
now.
right. It must be. I think I'm gonna ask Wonder Woman out.
Bane, you just met her. You didn't even meet. Oh my goodness. Fine, this is the game. I was worried that there was gonna be Alex there.
Alright,
what's going on with Lois?
Ahoy hoy, mister.
They would have pretty
I
funny
want to try living with
babies.
Ive.
Don't live with me.
You think? Well, I guess I'll give it up for now. Anyone who loves ruling the world is a friend of mine.
Lois. So you give them these phrases so you don't
Yum.
know who's gonna say them. See, if you give bad guys, I got them really into doing crimes, and then the good guys start saying it. So this is the Superman house. I made kind of fortress of solitude. Do I let Superman move out and live with the superheroes?
You know who I am. I'm hungry.
You've had all this stuff. Still trying to find his favorite.
Only the best for me.
Whoa. What else do you love?
Keep it on the down low, but you could find what is a hot day in my search history. I was just researching.
Don't know why hot day is in there. I think maybe someone asked what I don't like.
Only the best for me.
So what else are we gonna do today? We'll make another. So I made my Bizarro. I'd like to make Green Lantern just to fill out the JLA. He loves his virtual boy, look at that. Is it making him angry?
It's me, Poison Ivy.
The thing with Green Lantern is there's
I'm
a
hungry.
lot of Green Lanterns I'd like to add. It's like a whole day. Something filling.
Yum.
Oh no.
Sometimes I wonder if Freudian slips are real or if people are just being cheeky, dear.
Huh. Yeah, I haven't had green juice. That's crazy.
Yum.
There are 3,600 Green Lanterns. Canonically, I don't think they've ever named them all, but there's maybe 5 I'd like to add. I will add them. It's just a matter of all in one day. They're kind of simple though. I'd like to add Jonah Hex the cowboy. My OCs I haven't barely touched. Who else?
Aw,
Batman villains for the asylum.
thank goodness. Just a dream. Oh,
Maybe just
what's up?
OCs. Maybe like one at a time. I put one Green Lantern in,
It's hard for me to
One
let
Batman
things
villain.
go,
one OC.
especially
Pick up.
mistakes I made in the past.
I'll give you a food. I already had a food.
Welcome.
In the comics, beef bourguignon, however it's pronounced, is Superman's favorite food.
Thank you very much.
So I was excited when it showed up, and he didn't care at all.
Yum.
OCs, I'd have to create a new area, I think. Although I have some living with me already. It's funny that the two I added aren't superheroes. What is some good cowboy? Actually, there's a cowboy shirt I'd like to give you. Excuse me a second. No, I thought my cat was trying to get out.
Thank you.
I think the reason I haven't already is because I did them on another profile in a demo, and so I have to do it all over again. Which would, for some of them, that's a bit annoying.
Huh? I knew you were gonna come say hi. Ha 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 ha. Ha ha.
No.
I want to try living with Batman. Ha 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 ha.
Luthor does live with Superman. No, it's not.
You think? Well, I guess I'll give it up for now. Ha 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 ha.
I'm sorry, Joker.
If you think I'm staring at you, I'm probably not. That's just how my face looks. Ha ha ha
It's
ha.
actually true. What do you? You don't have a favorite yet.
Hee hee ha ha.
It's fine. Let's look at Arkham Asylum.
Sweet.
There we go. So yeah, it's just three. Three's not enough.
Hey, mister,
I want
how's it
Robin
going?
to move in with Batman.
I think Superboy and I would be best friends.
Sure.
What should we talk about to help them get along?
Fighting crime. I don't do a lot of fighting crime. Reading comics?
Got it? I'll go round up Superboy and I. Say hello to Superboy. Superboy, this is Ive.
Not a big fan of my outfit there.
Do you feel like talking about reading comics?
Sure.
Cool. Well, I have to say, I've been super into reading comics lately.
But Wouldn't you rather be smooching than reading comics?
Oh,
Um,
I suppose that's true for some people. Oh, that reminds me. Oh, well,
No,
Superboy
he's a
used to be
boy.
all about smooching too.
But that's just another way of saying he isn't interested in smooching now, right?
just me hanging out with the boys
Um,
talking about
They're
smooching.
not friends yet. I guess everyone's got their own opinion about reading comics.
Uh,
It's not easy to get good at
Come on.
smooching, but it's worth every bit of effort.
uh, rubbing. I could have made some of these rocks. Alright. I wish that didn't happen. That's the music from the original Tomodachi Life.
You're a super lady. You're a super lady.
Cool. So he doesn't just run on paths.
Laughing but it's serious thing.
Laughing but at serious things was Joker's thing. What do I do? What's that thing here?
Then feet head shut. 1 to 4 the pond art, but you exit formalities limits,
Let's go that bat.
and that's it when you step.
So I can add someone. Well, nothing's going on here. Actually, Bane? Bane wants some company. Let's go Dark Messiah. And then you'll want to live there. He hasn't met Harley Quinn. Oh, what are these holes there?
Pardon me, could I have a moment? My name is Bane.
Ha ha ha. Good day, Bane. I am called Harley Quinn. Tee hee hee.
When funny videos will get shut, Burden. Playbo, Harley Quinn, and
I
Tap
put his little device there and a little pipe that runs through his brain. Feeds him his venom that makes him get muscly.
Thanks for your help there. I feel like Harley Quinn and I get along a little better now.
Alright, give him some quirks. I could give him the muscly training thing. Alright, what's he got? This is how he walks. How does he stand? That's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Yeah, I think that one. The other one makes him look bigger. Yeah. Cute. Yeah. I've been giving them a few dances because otherwise I wouldn't be
I feel
using
like
them.
I'm becoming my true self more and more.
What's she doing? Yeah, these holes, I guess I moved things around. There's a little ride in there. I didn't do that, so I would ask for that. Let's fill that in. They can have rides, they can't have water. Oh, there's a tree as well. I guess you can have trees. Let's put it there. That's for Ivy to look at. This bell is weird. Yeah, that makes it so much better. No, yeah, Who do I add? Who am I gonna add? There's so much space there. So today I've added Bizarro, a supervillain. I did what? I don't Green Lantern. I can add 43 new me's. I'm gonna just finish that up and then I'm gonna start working on my IC. So, Green Lantern, I actually made Green Lantern already, but it was on the other account. It's gonna be Hal Jordan. Be very simple. He was my favorite. He kind of got into comics. I bought an action figure of him. And it came with a free comic, and then I got really into it. His hair. Let's not get too fancy. No eyebrows for now. No nose. Pupilless eyes. It's gonna be one of those things where I go back and forth in the face paint. He's got this is his smile. He is a bit cocky. A bit cheeky. Normal ears. I'll deal with that later, alright. Wait a minute. Stop. Copy another maze paint. Alright. What do we got here? That's... Alright, I haven't done a lot of masks, I guess. So. I think that's the right green right there. So it's a bit round at the top and then it gets flat at the bottom. Kinda like that. No. Kinda like... Still comes to a... Oh, that's not... I don't have... Straight. So from there to there. What I want is... Gotta reach the middle line and then erase to from there to the center line. Yeah. Nah. Just a bit. Good night. Thanks for tuning in. It's 4:30 p.m. where I am. So I don't think I'll be going much. I think this is my end. I've been going for 3 hours. Good night. Thanks for tuning in. It's always great when people come and encourage me. It's funny getting compliments about something like this that I'm kind of obsessed with anyway. That's pretty perfect. Yeah. Could make that glow. I think he's good. He doesn't need any of that. Maybe a bit of that? Nah. Something like that. Yeah, because he smiles a lot. I think it kind of makes his smile look nervous. Yeah, I might get rid of those lines. There's this weird one. I think if I put that down here, squash it. Yeah, I like that. I wish I could rotate those cheek lines. I guess that's what that is. I think I might just leave him bare. Yeah. He's gotta be as tall as Flash. Can't call him a Green Lantern if I do more than one Green Lantern. It's Hal Jordan.
My name is Hal Jordan.
He's so cute. He's a male. Let's refer to my spreadsheet. 20th of the 2nd. Age, I'll put him as 40. Let's make him 39.
My name is
Hal Jordan.
My name is
Hal Jordan. It's not.
He's a fast guy.
My name is Hal Jordan. My name is Hal Jordan. It's not. My name is Hal Jordan. 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 It's nice to meet you. My name is Hal Jordan. My name is Hal Jordan. It's nice to meet you. Today, my name is Hal Jordan. My name is Hal Jordan. My name is Hal Jordan. It's nice to meet you. My name is Hal
giving a
Jordan.
normal voice
It's
means
nice
they
to
all
meet you.
sound the
My
same.
name is Hal Jordan. My name is Hal Jordan. My name is Hal Jordan. My name is Hal Jordan. It's nice to meet you. My name is Hal Jordan. My name is Hal Jordan. It's not. My name is Hal Jordan. My name is Hal Jordan.
Nope. He's quick. He's if you want to be a Green Lantern, you have to be honest. That's the rules. Honest and fearless. He's pretty chill and also pretty serious. Let's say middle. He's a bit quirky. Energy. Serious and chill. I think more chill than serious. It's all good. Gonna give him a outfit and then I'm gonna call it quits. It's a long stream. Lives across from Wonder Woman.
Hey there. It's nice to meet you,
I haven't done a
Mr.
space room.
I'm Hal Jordan. I'm an outgoing dynamo who loves getting to know others. People often tell me I'm very passionate. I can't wait to start living here.
Alright, first, gotta fade him.
I was born into this world, and I plan on ruling it before I leave.
Hal Jordan. Hal Jordan, no.
Yum.
If I play for 20 more minutes, the night market's gonna be open. But I might do that in my own time.
Yum.
He looks so cool. I don't have green boots. I don't know what to do for his room. Alright, I got it. Long sleeve. Blank base. So, I have made Gnaught's Green Lantern outfit. And so you can't put rings on their fingers, but why does that not fit? What's happening here? Did I reset? Is it? What's happening? Let's try tagging white. Alright. It's perfect. So you can't put rings on the fingers, so I've made this little band to go along there. This was two different blacks. And greens. I love this game. I love this game so much. Alright, let's start with this. I want him to kind of wear gloves. Yeah, that's good. So he's gonna wear his ring around his wrist. Now, black. Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, he's had a few costumes. uniforms, I should say. There's ones that don't. Yeah, which one do I like best? There's ones that's just pretty much that, but there's ones that go down the sleeve a bit. Why did I? The ones they all kind of do that, and I realized I just kind of deleted. That was kind of already there. But it goes even further in, is the thing. So like, start there. And actually, let's figure out where the belt is gonna go. So sometimes this goes all the way, covers the crutch, the green bit, but not for a while. And then lately, it's been more like this. Nope, not stamp. This one, triangle. See, I'd love to stretch that triangle. What if I do this? Join that. Nah. 1 pixel, straight line from here to there. I think that's it. Yeah. But then also this has to join at the back. Do this, do this. Go back to black, make this rounded. I think that's kind of good. Nah, this has to go way more in. Like, kind of like that. And then kind of like that. Yeah, nah. If I make all that green and then stamp a circle. Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Am I gonna try and do the shoulder bit? Probably not. Alright, let's get this. This is where I find out whether the symbol is symmetrical. It isn't. Let's make this a bit more. Like that. Yeah, and this needs to be thicker. I really thought this was going to be really simple. Yep. Get a feeling I'm going to come back to this one a lot. Yeah. I don't know how the back goes. Copy that, flip it. I think I will try and do the shoulders. Let's do the back first, that's a mess. Gonna Google this. I mean, I know how the old one was. Nah, I'm gonna just do it. I'm just gonna do it. Alright, I need to figure out this bit. Hang on. If I just do this, make sure that matches. Why is it different on the back? I guess our backs are different to our fronts. Let's match that to there. Yeah, let's match that to there. I think that's kind of what it is, yeah. Let's... Nope. I think I've got that down. Oh, and I just gotta flip. Just gotta flip this back. This was meant to be an easy one. Middle. Copy, flip. Yeah, I'm gonna be doing this forever. I'm gonna be going back. I don't mean today, I mean I'm basically never gonna be happy with this. Let's go this from up top. Wow, that goes halfway down his dragon. Oh, that's not good. Maybe I don't want to do the bits. I think I'm happy with that. So I wish I could make just the logo bit glow. But you gotta make the whole thing glow or nothing. No, this isn't Green Lantern top, it's a Hal Jordan top. Hal top.
Hell top.
I never changed that stuff. I gotta let my cat out. I'm nearly done anyways. Maybe I just end it here. If you want to see more, I'll stream again soon. I'm gonna be in Sydney for at least 2 weekends, so one more. I'll try and do one more this weekend, and then just before I take a little break. Thanks for watching. If you're watching this live, check out Nonstop Live on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, check out Sir Ive on Twitch. And I'm Sir Ive on Instagram and Blue Sky. I've I've talked about my comics and stuff. Check that out there. Yeah, thanks very much for watching. Getting more viewers. That's kind of fun. Yeah, goodbye.